Jordan and Gretzky, Serena and Ruth. Remembering great ones is easy to do. But what about the no-names who spent their whole lives long snapping footballs and catching sack flies? They're guys, remember that guy. Remember that guy, remember that guy, remember that guy, remember that guy. They're just gonna remember some guys now.
That's more than realness, Vince. That is real life flying. That's why those guys in the NBA that are superstars don't want to be in it. They're scared of Remember That Guy, the show where we mine our memories for nuggets of nostalgia about peripheral players, past and present. Hey there, folks. It is me, one of your hosts, James, joined by some other all-star talent.
All-star runner-up, nominee. I'll take something like that. We're in the running for sure. Diaz back with you once again. We do have a very special guest. He is the person who has proved not once, not twice, but 3 times that white men can in fact jump. Please introduce yourself.
That's me. It's Delaware 87ers legend Mac McClung. I had the best job in the world. I don't have to pay attention to anything 99% of the year. I show up for the dunk contest, and more people know of my name than 80% of the bench options on any NBA roster. You know, who wouldn't want to be me at this point?
I mean, I do feel for him a little bit, because I hear what he's saying about, like, I don't want to keep coming back and just doing the dunk contest every year. He was, like, reticent to come back this season. I totally get if he does not ever come back and do it again. It is, like, a little bit, are we making a sideshow out of this guy? That being said, Mac McClung, first ballot Hall of Guy inductee, without a doubt. Like, no, we don't even have to breathe a word of debate. That man, the second he retires, is in the Hall of Guy. If you guys don't mind, I would love to talk about NBA All-Star Weekend for what's making memories for me. I had a great time watching it as a Spurs fan.
Oh, please, go ahead, James.
So there are, like, some real reasons that it was good. First off, Stephen Castle, Rising Stars Challenge MVP. Rising Stars Challenge, Rising Stars Game, I'm never entirely sure what it's called. But I got to watch Stephen Castle be just great. He's probably going to win Rookie of the Year if they don't, like, completely fall off a cliff. And then Wemby, made all the old hats happy by caring about the All-Star Game. But if you watched it, I think you know what I, as a Spurs fan, want to talk about, which is that Wemby also cared about winning something else. Just some grade A shithousery in the skills challenge. The most meaningless part of the entire weekend. Truly, it does not matter whatsoever, and that is why I loved seeing Wemby and CP3 come out for the skills challenge, which, would you call it an obstacle course?
Yeah, it's an obstacle course.
Yeah, it's an obstacle course with some skills-based challenge in which you are shooting or passing a basketball, and there's a portion where they get to a rack of balls. You need to make some shots, except you don't actually need to make some shots. You need to take 3 shots to try and make it, but after 3, there is no penalty if you missed all of them, you move on. And so if you watch this, you watched Wemby and Chris Paul both execute most aspects of this very, very well, and then get to that rack and just kind of limply toss 3 balls as quickly as they possibly could to continue on to the next challenge. They were disqualified for this. It is cheating, quote unquote, but I didn't see a rule that said they couldn't do it. Adam Silver made up a rule afterwards that said they couldn't do this, but it's just some excellent airbud attempts at doing it. And I think what is so delightful about this is that Wemby has come out and he has taken credit or blame, however you want to view it, for this outcome. But let's be real. Chris Paul is the single most, rulebook enforcer guy that exists in the league today and maybe ever in league history. It just is what he is. He's gotten people technical fouls for coming in with untucked jerseys. We're not going to use the N-word for rules anymore because that has to apply to the people that it actually applies to in the word. The N-A word. I feel like I should clarify.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry,
James.
The N-A word. We'll see how much of that remains in the recording. But anyway.
Well, no, I think the best way to put it is it's just like how Charlie Murphy described Rick James. He's a habitual line stepper.
Yes, he is a habitual line stepper. And again, Wemby has said that it was his idea to do this. With that being said, this kind of flagrant manipulation of the rules does not happen without the veteran presence of CP3 in that locker room. And I'm someone coming into this year Like, I don't hate a lot of players in the NBA. I came pretty close to that feeling with Chris Paul, mostly because of the way that the Clippers ended the Tim Duncan era with that last playoff series in Tim Duncan's final season. But it has just been so great enjoying the Spurs Chris Paul era. And I frankly hope that he retires a Spur. I hope that the rest of his career, whether that be this year, whether that be one more year afterwards, whether that be another 5, I hope this dude just stays with the Spurs. He can be the Udonis Haslem if he wants. He is just the perfect veteran presence for this team. That is what you get from that kind of wily locker room presence. And I hope whatever the stupid All-Star game becomes for many years, that Victor Wembanyama continues to absolutely own it. But if he gets to do more dumb stuff like this, it will be because of the vital mentorship of Chris Paul. Go Spurs, go.
Well, what I'm curious, because I think this podcast, more than any other, has spent a lot of time debating who is going to be Greg Popovich's eventual replacement. Like, we've said Becky Hammond, we've said Brett Brown. Could it be Chris Paul?
Could it be
Chris Paul? If he hangs around for another couple years, he becomes a roster spot in name only, more of an assistant coach, but eventually could it be Spurs head coach Chris Paul? I think it would work great, because the same characteristic that we're saying that we love /hate
I love
recognize.
now. Chris Paul is a Hall of Fame version of Patrick Beverley, a person that you absolutely despise until the second he is on your roster, and then you love him.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Pat Beverley played half a season in Philadelphia, and he's beloved here still. But, yeah, just the idea that, Chris Paul, obviously an incredibly cerebral player, like, might have the highest basketball IQ of anybody in the 21st century in the NBA. Like, I'll go as far back as that, because, like, I'm sure there was some fucking backup point guard in the 70s that was even better. But, like, Chris Paul's BBIQ is the highest I've ever seen. And why not? Why not? You often ask why. I ask, why not?
Guy not.
Guy not.
There's one thing that I want to bring up from the All-Star game that I think is important, and it's the All-Star player poll that The Athletic puts out, which is one of the most ridiculous things I see every year, because players are assholes, they're selfish, they're ridiculous. All the expansion ones are, put it in the city that I live in so I don't have to move anywhere. But my favorite was, who will be the best NBA player in 5 years? Have either of you seen this?
Not. I am excited to hear the results.
So there were 15 players that answered. 6 said Victor Wembanyama. 2 said Evan Mobley. Those 2 were Evan Mobley and Darius Garland.
Okay.
2 said the field, which is not an answer when you can pick a single player. And then the following 5 players each got 1 vote. Cade Cunningham, who voted for himself. Jason Tatum. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Anthony Edwards. And Dink Pate, who also voted for himself.
I'm going to be honest, and maybe this is because I've been much more into the Spurs versus the league as a whole this year, because the Spurs have been more fun to watch. Dink who?
He doesn't even play in the G League or the NBA. He plays in Mexico for the Mexico City Capitanes.
Why does he have... Well, no,
Did he get a
that's
vote?
a G League team.
Is it a G League team?
They are, yeah.
Oh, they actually complete in both. Yeah, I see that. So
cool.
Yeah, he is a G League player for the Mexico City Capitanes, who says that he will be the best player in the NBA in 5 years. So, may you always have the confidence of Dink Pate.
May we all have the confidence of Dink Pate. I do feel like, but before we move to what you guys have, I think as proud members of the Dawn Staley Hive, feels like we need to acknowledge that the W71 at home was snapped in an absolute drubbing for the Gamecocks against the University of Connecticut Huskies. Oof, that was brutal. And time to start another one. Go Cox.
UConn is going to rue that they won it by that much. A great performance on the day. Obviously.
Incredible. Yeah, we ain't out here talking
smack anything away. You do have to hand it to them. You actually do. But if you get that rematch down the road, that's a lot of fuel for Dawn to cook with. And we all know she's going to cook.
Speaking of, what's cooking for you guys right now? What's making memories?
Well, I just finished up last week. It was my first swim meet that I've worked in professional broadcasting, and it was, of course, the favorite conference of me, perhaps the favorite conference of both of you as well, as far as mid-majors go, the MAAC, M-A-A-C swimming tournament. Just a delightful atmosphere to be a part of for 4 days. Yeah, it was because I was there for 5, but the first day was set up. So across 4 days, the community and solidarity that you see at a swim meet like this, where, yes, all the schools are competing against each other, but after every single race, you're hugging the person in the lane next to you, whether they're from your school or they're not. Everybody cheering for. I don't have the exact count in front of me, but there were at least 15 meet records that fell during this meet.
Is this like the 2008 Olympics where like some new swimsuit has been developed and everyone's just breaking everything for that reason?
Not to my knowledge. The tournament was held at the same location last year. So like it's not even like, oh, fast water, like, which is a thing that they said. Like our commentator was saying, like, oh, the water's really fast today. Like, I
will do some research before next week to try and figure out what fast water means.
Yeah, like obviously on a track it'd be like, oh yeah, the wind's at their back, but like it's a very still air environment. I don't know, maybe some jets going on underneath the water, but yeah, amazing to see the community that's formed, and like it never gets old how it's just dead silent right before the gun, and the second, not the gun, but like the beep. The second the beep goes, everybody's hooting and hollering the whole time. And one thing in particular that I want to shout out, on the second day of the tournament, a Fairfield mom came up to our production area, came to me first initially, and was having some problems with her camera. She wanted to figure it out. And I said, look, I'm just the graphics guy, not the camera guy. But those people over there, those are the camera guys. They can probably help you. And thankfully, they were able to help. And, I talked with her for a couple of minutes. She thanked us for doing our production. And I was like, oh, yeah, who's your child? Who should I be on the lookout for? She said, oh, Chris Webber, 1B. Christopher is also how he goes.
You anticipated my question.
Not that Chris Webber. But yeah, Christopher
Going back
Webber.
To school, Rodney Dangerfield style.
Could you imagine? Oh. But she said, yeah, Christopher Webber, he came back for his COVID year, because COVID year is not just in football and basketball. Everybody gets a COVID year if they want it. So he took his COVID year, he came back for it, and sure enough, as I'm typing in all of the different events that I had to do, it's about like 80 to 90 events a day with like 10 people in it that I had to get the name exactly right, obsess over getting it exactly right. And when I get to the last heat of the last event on the last day, for individuals, there were still relays after this, but for the last individual race, sure enough, in lane 4 from Fairfield, Christopher Webber in the 200 butterfly, and he goes on and he wins it. And in his last race that he will ever compete in as a collegiate athlete, and presumably, I don't think he's going to be representing Team USA. I don't know what pro swim leagues in the US, I don't think they exist. So in his last race ever, Christopher Webber goes on and wins it. And look, I'll never meet Christopher Webber. I only met his mom for like 3 to 4 minutes, but there's just something real nice about, having that interaction, knowing that, oh, she is just a mom that wants to be able to get pictures of her son's last ever swimming meet, and, he gets to go out on top. So shout out Christopher Webber, shout out Christopher Webber's mom, shout out the Niagara Purple Eagles, absolutely dominated both men and women. It was like by about 100 points in the standings.
Yeah, when you're swimming by a waterfall, you're just going to be better.
Get that resistance training, obviously. But no, it was a thrill to be able to work that. I hope to work many more swim meets, swim events. It is a lot of work as a graphics person. And I know Canner is listening to this right now and nodding. Dude, and it's not like with basketball or with football, I enter the roster and then I just pick the name. I don't have to worry about typing the name correctly every time. With a swim meet, I have to type the name, I have to type the school, I have to type everything very correctly every time. And, a couple times I didn't, but that's okay. It is a lot of work, but, pales in comparison to the work that those athletes put in over the course of their lives. And love seeing everybody come together to celebrate each other. It was just a nice, wholesome atmosphere there. Everybody there to see some swimming. Go Mac! And the basketball tournament just a month away.
And if I may, with the Purple Eagles, go Birds!
Go Birds. Go Birds. Always go Birds. They did do the EAGLES at the end
Perfect.
of it. And I was like, you know what? It's yours too. The birds, we know how to share.
And good thing for Chris Webber, you cannot call a timeout in swimming. So that would just never come up for him in a major meet.
Imagine you could. Everyone stop right now. Stay in your exact spot in the lane.
They would do it like lacrosse. So like if you call a timeout in lacrosse, women's lacrosse at least, you just drop your stick where it is. They just drop their swim cap exactly where it was.
Hey, that's two of us. Xavier, what do you have this week?
Yeah, I got a couple soccer stuff that have been making memories. So we're recording this on the 18th. So this was the second leg for half of the Champions League knockout games. I was watching Celtic versus Bayern, which was absolutely heartbreaking because Celtic battered Bayern. This is a Celtic team that has not won a knockout stage Champions League game ever. And in Munich, absolutely dominated them. Should have scored 3 or 4 before halftime. Didn't. Finally broke through in the second half to score, which made it 1-0 on the night and 2-2 on aggregate. Looked like we were about to go to extra time. And with 30 seconds left in the game, a bad clearance, a good shot, I should say, gets saved by the keeper, falls to the defender to clear it. He turns to clear it out, and it bounces in off Bayern's Alphonso Davies to score, to tie it on the night and win it on aggregate with literally the last kick of the game. Heartbreaking for Celtic. They deserve to win. Bayern deserved nothing from the game, but no magic there, unfortunately. Where there was magic was in Atalanta versus Bruges. So Atalanta, third in Serie A, very good team. Bruges, second in the Belgian league. They won at home 2-1 last week. And now in Atalanta, Atalanta was still favored to go through, and they just crumble. They were down 3-1, so it was 5-2 on aggregate to Bruges with just a couple minutes left. And then in the 87th minute, or 86th minute, the captain of Atalanta went absolutely nuts. One of the craziest red cards I've ever seen. I beg you all to look. Whenever CBS or Paramount posts the highlights to YouTube, you have to see this. He goes to clear it for a throw, and he just aggressively kicks it as hard as he can at a Bruges player, bounces it off for a throw. The Bruges player pushes him a little bit when he's going to take the throw because he's like, hey, that was a little too aggressive. So what Atalanta's player, their captain, Rafael Toloi, does, he winds back to throw the ball at the back of this guy's head. The ball just slips out of his arm, and he falls on his face, just totally whiffs. And he's so embarrassed and mad at that, he gets up immediately. The ref runs over to him to try to calm him down. He pushes past the ref and just body checks the Bruges player in the back while he's not looking, knocking them both to the ground. Ref immediately sends him off. He starts going nuts on the ref. All the other players have to pull him away to keep him from fighting the ref. He went absolutely ballistic. I've never seen anyone go this nuts in a game that I was watching, and not like something old like Eric Cantona jumping into the stands to kick a guy. It was absolutely crazy. The other thing that I saw that is not violent and also very exciting is Greenland is still trying to get into CONCACAF so they can play real international soccer. And there was a really great article that came out today by Felipe Cardenas in The Athletic that's titled Greenland, Out in the Cold and in Geopolitical Crosshairs, Sees Hope in CONCACAF. And it is all about how they are taking soccer really, really seriously. And they really want to play professional soccer. And they keep emailing and calling CONCACAF, hoping they'll let them in. And after doing it for months and months and months in a row, they finally got a meeting with CONCACAF. And they're hoping that they just kind of bothered them enough that they'll just let them join the federation, because CONCACAF already has a bunch of other teams that are not their own country. A lot of the Caribbean teams that are, dependencies or territories of other European countries. So it really wouldn't be weird for them to be in there.
Hey. Puerto Rico also, Commonwealth, USA territory. I'm just saying, it's not just the Europeans that subjugate.
That's true. There's plenty of subjugation to go around. But I would be really excited to see if Greenland could get into CONCACAF because their fields are all AstroTurf because they can't grow grass up there.
Oh, see, I thought you were going to say they have to play on ice in Greenland, and I was way more excited for that.
2, you can't fly to where they have their field. You have to take ferries through icebreakers to get there because their field is not in the capital. It is further north in this one city where the entire Greenland soccer league goes and plays a tournament every year in this one field, and that's how they do their annual soccer league. Everyone travels to one specific field in a northern part of Greenland because that's all they have. So imagine Trinidad and Tobago flying to, I guess you'd have to fly to America first, and then to Greenland, and then taking icebreaker ferries to play in subarctic conditions. And I want to see this so badly. Because I also want to see the Greenlanders do the same and go to fucking Honduras and play in San Pedro Sula, which would be absolutely ridiculous. All the extremes you would have in CONCACAF, and nothing is more CONCACAF than that.
We now have the sequel to Can You Win It on a Rainy Night at Stoke? Can You Win It on a Frozen Night in Greenland? I was going to try to make up a city, and that would have been horribly offensive.
No, that's delightful. 2025 is the year of James the soccer fan. We are going to make it happen. I've adopted Nottingham Forest officially as an English system team. The Tricky Trees. I'm going to get into it, and I will also become a Greenland fan. The 2 jerseys I own right now are an Irish and Ugandan national team jersey, so why not get a Greenland one also?
I'm going to get you on the Annapolis Blues wave. The schedule just came out today.
Honestly, if I could get away with the kid, I will totally come to an Annapolis Blues game.
I'll send you the schedule. I will send, and we will make it happen.
God, the city they have their league in, I cannot even try to pronounce that. It's Quequertarsuaq. That is 3 too many Q's for me to be able to pronounce it correctly. So I apologize to Greenland, but I will not even try.
That's a ridiculously high Scrabble score. We have something else to chow down on this week. We have a delightful segment with new friend of the show, John of the social media accounts Discontinued Foods, who joined us a few weeks back to talk about some guys. That was just a scrumptious conversation, and I'm running out of food adjectives here. So we're going to go ahead and throw to our segment with John now. You can hear about some more delicious guys. Ladies and gentlemen and everyone else, we are proud to bring to the show a new friend of the show, a friend of your stomach, my stomach, the stomachs of yesteryear. We are ready to remember some foods with the person behind the social media account Discontinued Foods, John Finn. Welcome to the show.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
If you were going to give the quick elevator pitch spiel for Discontinued Foods, what would you say to someone is the appeal of following this?
All right, so the idea is, we all eat, right? We all like to eat. And I think most of us, especially people over a certain age, love to reminisce. We love to look back on our childhood. And I think food and people's childhood really go hand in hand. Food plays a role in people's lives from toddlerhood through, where we are now. So what my account does is it just gives a place for people to reminisce and discuss and just share all their memories from snacks and fast food items and everything in between from the past. So any food that is no longer being made, that was made at one time, as going back all the way to the 1950s up till as recently as 2024, my account shares them, gives some history, and it just provides an opportunity for people to share their memories.
I figured this is a sports history podcast. Let's get for a moment. What is kind of your sporting background, if we're going to be remembering some guys as well?
Yeah, so I am a big sports fan. I've been a sports fan my whole life. Primarily baseball and football are the 2 big ones, although I was really, really, really big into basketball as a kid, especially the Bulls. Again, growing up in the 90s, I was a huge Michael Jordan fan. But I grew up as an Orioles fan. I have to say the Baltimore Orioles are my favorite sports team of all. growing up in Rochester, New York, right? So home of the Rochester Red Wings. We're the AAA team for the Orioles my whole childhood, so I saw a lot of prospects and not quite so prospects come through here. So that's
I just want to interject because I will forget about this. There was exactly one time I've ever been to a Rochester Red Wings game. I also am an Orioles fan. All the folks listening have heard that. My folks, though, were also fans of a certain musical act called the Beach Boys. And there was one time the Beach Boys did a concert after the Rochester Red Wings game. And my parents took us up to Rochester mostly for that Beach Boys concert so that we could see the Rochester Red Wings. And then the very, very old Beach Boys get trucked onto the field with like flatbed. And we have incredibly grainy digital camera footage of this that I've recently seen while going through stuff with my folks. That's the Rochester Red Wings for you.
Yeah. So I've been an O's fan my whole life, and obviously living in Rochester. As you can see here, I'm a Bills fan. Go Bills! Less than an hour to the west is the great city of Buffalo. So those are still my two teams. And as I said, I was a Bulls fan growing up as well. Although after Jordan retired, I kind of fell away from basketball. I followed the Pacers briefly because I really liked Reggie Miller. So I followed the Pacers briefly into the early 2000s. And then my basketball fandom kind of fell away. And I was big into college basketball for a while, especially during my high school years and into college, really back when the Big East was the Big East. I followed that pretty closely. And then in terms of playing sports, I played baseball and basketball growing up until my love for the game no longer matched my talent for the game. So at that point, it was no longer about having fun. It started getting really competitive. So I kind of shifted gears with my interests at that point. But I always played, intramurals in college and played pickup games. So, sports have always been a big part of my life.
Going back now to foods for a moment, do you have a first one that stands out? I mean, like either in your personal life, there was one that always stuck with you, or when you started doing this, a first food that really stands out as the one that kind of kicked off this, I don't want to say obsession because of the negative connotations, passion. Passion feels better.
Yeah, there's definitely a couple. So I can just give you a quick background on how I got into this in the first place, because I think that'll answer your question to a degree. So during the pandemic, I was so bored, I think like most of us were. I was working from home, and all I wanted to do was just talk about old foods that I had been thinking about. Primarily, a couple that came to mind, the drink line Fruitopia, which I know is still available in Canada, but it's been gone in the U.S. for years. A couple cereals, a Betty Crocker cereal, Cinnacrunch Pebbles, and one of my very favorite little snacks, Dizzy Grizzlies, which was a Teddy Grahams spin-off in the mid-'90s. And no one would take the bait on this on social media. No one wanted to talk about this stuff. No one wanted to engage. And I said, you know what? I have to talk about this somewhere. So I'm just going to set up an account dedicated to these things, and let's go from there. So it was primarily foods from around, I would say, in the mid-'90s or so, which is kind of, that's my mid-childhood was around that time. So I just started an account, and it took off from there.
Here's where we bridge the gap. Combining the two. The thing that I have always loved the most about Discontinued Foods is the very brief-lived athlete line. And there's a lot of variety. I picked a couple of my favorites to look back. I did not think to bring up my old jar of Manny Machado salsa, which has stored other non-salsa things in it for a very long time. But I do have a Manny Machado salsa jar. We had the Haloti Nata crab curls down here. Some favorites that I saw looking through yours. There's the David Robinson fruit snacks. The very best one, Adam Deadmarsh's Deli Dills, the pickles named after one of the members of the 96 championship Colorado Avalanche. So there's a lot of variety out there, but there's also something you notice when you go through the Discontinued Foods of athletes. There is the cereal for Ben Zobrist. There's the cereal for DeAndre Hopkins. There's the cereal for Randy Moss. There's the cereal for the 1999 U.S. Women's National Team. There's the cereal for Jeff Gordon. Maybe you know a little bit more about this. Is there just a factory full of nondescript cereal that is waiting for people to print out whatever box that they've decided that flavor is going to be associated with?
Yeah, the big company, I believe, is PLB Sports. And what really put them on the map was Flutie Flakes, the Doug Flutie cereal.
It's another one I have here on the list. Yeah. I didn't want to just rattle off 20, but Doug Flutie Flakes are also on here.
Yes, and I gotta tell you guys, that became like... I don't know, like an Indiana Jones artifact here in Western New York. Like every household in Western New York has a sealed box of Flutie Flakes from 1998 in their garage somewhere. It just became like this cult item here in the region. But PLB Sports was the company that put that out, and that kind of put them on the map. But they contracted with like some of these small kind of generic cereal companies that always just have the machinery set up for basic flake cereals, basic Cheerios. You know, think about it. Every supermarket in the country has their own version of Cheerios, right?
Yeah.
Every pharmacy has their own, version of Frosted Flakes. So it's just so easy. Probably the most complex one, I forget which athlete it was. One of the athletes had Honey Bunches of Oats, and that was about as like gourmet as you get.
Any athlete's able to get.
Yeah.
Have you ever come across that, like, I would love to believe that Manny Machado just felt very strongly about salsa. I have to imagine most of these instances are like brands coming to the athletes and saying, hey, we would like to put your face on this. Have you found any instances of any athlete saying, God, I have always wanted to have my own cereal?
Well, not cereal, but then this will be of interest to you. Ed Reed had his own line of chicken sausages, and that was his idea. Like he was like, he said, I love sausage, but pork sausage is really unhealthy. As an athlete, I want to eat healthy, and I love sausage. I would love a line of chicken, like low-fat chicken sausage with my name on it.
Go Birds on so many different levels. I love that.
I found the PLB Sports Instagram account. They have 3 pinned posts for current NFL cereals, and I need some guesses on what these cereals are.
Ooh. Would teams be giving it away too much?
I could tell you. It's Jets, Bills, and Commanders.
I feel like Von Miller. Von Miller feels like the Bill that has cereal right now.
Any other guesses?
I know the Bills one because it's at sale at Wegmans all around here. But
okay,
all right. Diaz, you have a guess?
I'll say for the Commanders, Terry McLaurin feels like he has a cereal for him.
That's a good guess.
And let's throw one out for the Jets. I'm trying to think of anyone other than Aaron Rodgers that I think can.
Sauce Gardner.
Sauce Gardner actually would be a very funny cereal choice.
That would be.
Okay,
I wanted to see that.
It is indeed Breece Hall.
All right.
Okay.
We have Breece the Beast, which is Cinnamon Toast Crunch, or, the most nondescript Cinnamon Toast Crunch. It's called Cinnamon Toasted Squares. We have Josh Allen's Josh's Jacks.
I was overthinking it.
Fruit Loops. And then we have Terry McLaurin's Crunch Time.
Which is
Frosted Flakes.
Nice.
He's the only guy that's been there, like...
It couldn't be Jaden Daniels this year.
Run.
And this kind of brings me to, I think, my last question about the idea of remembering these foods specifically, because very clearly these kind of become the same like esoterica that sports fans want to collect. I have a jar of Manny Machado salsa on my shelf of other stuff. And admittedly, it isn't the salsa, but you were just talking about how, Flutie Flakes have become this holy grail. And there is, I'm sure, still unsealed versions of most of these foods somewhere out there. I'm curious if you've ever considered what it is like for this thing that is meant for consumption more than anything else that's going to be marketed with these players. It is literally meant for consumption, and sports fandom has managed to turn these into something that needs to remain mint in box, even as it goes years and years past its expiration date.
Yeah, that really is wild, and I never really thought about it from that angle, but it's so funny. I mean, they could have just put out a piece of cardboard with that image, with the player's image on the front, and no one would want it, but you stick a sealed bag of, corn and oat-based consumables inside it, and suddenly people want to have it. I think there's just some novelty, and there's something in like our dumb little reptile brains, there's something fun about athlete I like cereal, let's put it together, but I don't need to eat the cereal. It's just the idea of it. I think there's something just very amusing about that.
There was a special edition of glass Coke bottles that came out when Delaware last won the 1AA championship in 2003.
Yes.
And my mom still has an unopened 6-pack. Just chilling.
There were some for Cal Ripken 2131 because my
were.
family also has that. But scandalously, we only have 4 bottles because there was one time I had a babysitter when I was like 4 who drank 2 of the bottles. And this was like a thing.
No.
that my parents were chill with her to her face. But for years, you would just hear about she had to drink 2 of those bottles. We still have the 6-pack like for it with 2 empty bottles along 4 full ones of Coke.
Incredible.
You know, this is nothing new. I mean, before the athlete cereals, it was Wheaties boxes, right? The collectible Wheaties boxes with World Series teams and Olympians and all that stuff. So there is a precedent for it.
We did an episode that was Wheaties Box Guys. Yeah. And I got to talk about a pilot, which was great because that led to a question of, is a pilot an athlete if they're doing all these different endurance tests?
And she got in eventually. We don't have to talk about how the results went that day, but she got in eventually.
I do. I would be remiss if we're talking about food and we're talking to a fellow from Rochester. What is your go-to garbage plate?
All right, so I'm going to plug right now my favorite garbage plate spot in Rochester is called Dogtown Hots. So if anyone's ever in Rochester, Monroe Avenue in Rochester, Dogtown Hots. It's a very small building. I think they make the most consistently good garbage plate. If you're asking about order, I am kind of a pariah here in Rochester because I hate mayonnaise. So I do not get mac salad on my garbage plates, which I know is like the purists here in town say it's gotta be home fries and mac salad. I think mayo is disgusting. That is, I think, should be a discontinued food. There should never be any mayonnaise ever anywhere on anything. So for my garbage plates, I get baked beans and home fries with a red hot and a white hot Rochester-style hot sauce, diced onions, and ketchup, because I don't like mustard either. So that's my order.
I will have to try that next time I visit my sister up in Rochester.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just had to know. Had to get it from the source.
And with our stomachs filled, I think it is time to satisfy a different hunger. The hunger that the Hall has for a new guy. We've got 3 nominees, as we understand it today, for consideration. And without any further ado, John, you have the floor.
Yes, so I picked 3. And I picked around a theme here because there is literally nowhere else in my life that I am able to discuss the dark era Baltimore Orioles. All right?
Hell yeah, brother.
So the dark era, to me, is from 2000 to 2011. The absolute worst years, from 97 to 99, right? 97, great team. Then you had 98, 99. It was kind of the slow downturn. When you hit 2000, right, we hit the 21st century, the Orioles as an organization just imploded, and it was the worst quality baseball you could possibly imagine, except for a brief little moment in 2005 where for the first half of the season they played well. But it was just awful for those years. For those 11 years, it was absolutely awful. And I don't have anywhere else to really talk about guys from those teams who... These are horrible teams, but some of these guys meant something to me. So I picked 3 players who played for the Orioles anywhere between 2000 and 2011. These are the players I call the good, the sad, and the ugly. All right, so these are my 3 picks. The good, the sad, and the ugly from...
Before we begin, I want to try and set the over-under. I want to see how many of these people do you think I have had a t-shirt with the name of at some point? I'm going to put it 2.5. Over-under is a 2.5. Who's taking the over, who's taking the under?
For 3, that's a heavy number. I would have set the line.
But think about all the free t-shirts that I got during this time period.
No, that's totally fair. I'll take the under.
I'll take the under only because one of them, I don't think anyone would have ever even dared to wear a shirt of. I don't think anyone was that brave.
I'll take the over just so we have someone on that side. I'll take the over.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to start with the good. And the good is one Mr. Melvin Mora. All right, Melvin Mora came over to the O's from the Mets. I think it was in 2000, 2001. Super utility. They had him in the outfield. They played him all over the infield. Was solid, was consistent, was kind of a defensive liability. They moved him over to third base permanently in, I want to say, maybe around 2003, 2004. And from that point on, he was just incredible. That year in 2004 sets the all-time franchise record, bats .340, has 27 bombs, 104 RBIs, finishes top 20 in MVP voting, wins Silver Slugger. He was an all-star 3 consecutive years. During that time, anywhere from 19 to 25 home runs a year, over 80 RBIs every year for 6 years in a row, played great defense during the absolute worst years in franchise history. And probably the other things he's most known for, always looking like he was about to start crying. That was just kind of his default face, was just like...
Very sad man.
Very
sad.
And, it's understandable.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth.
And I think the other famous thing was, I believe his wife had septuplets at one point, where they had like 7 kids all at once. So, but yes, Melvin Mora is my first guy. He is the good. He is one of the biggest bright spots, especially too because I think when you think of that era, if you think of Orioles and you think of 2000s, people usually automatically think Nick Markakis, they think Brian Roberts, but they're not necessarily thinking Melvin Mora, and I just wanted to give him his shine today.
I looked it up, it was quintuplets, and my autocomplete on my search was very helpful because the first result I got was Melvin Mora hijos. That was the very teams, baseball, Melvin Mora hijos. And it was cinco at one time, but they do have another kid, so it is 6 total.
Okay, so he has 6 total. All right, good for them. Good for the Mora family.
Also, if I'm not mistaken, I think he had one completely meaningless final year with the Colorado Rockies, and I love when just any of those instances of seeing a guy like Melvin Mora with the Rockies or Ricky Henderson with the Angels, obviously, not necessarily in the same breath, but same vision of that is not a correct uniform.
Yeah.
You got the Rockies, and then there was actually one more after that, James, because he went to the Diamondbacks.
Melvin Mora played for the Diamondbacks?
2011.
Yeah, honestly, I did not know that.
Mind-boggling that he made it to 2011.
Wow. So that's entry number 1. Now we're going to go to the sad. All right, so it's not the good, the bad, and the ugly, because there was enough bad in those years. I don't need to add any more. But sad. And for sad, I am going to go with one Ty Wigginton.
Folks, so far we are 2 for 2 on shirts. Just so we are keeping track. We are 2 for 2 on shirts. I purchased a Ty Wigginton shirt. I spent real money on a Ty Wigginton shirt.
So, Ty Wigginton, this is why this is sad. Because what I will always remember about Ty Wigginton is in 2010, he was the Orioles All-Star representative. And if there was ever a sadder example of the everyone needs to have an all-star rule, it doesn't get any sadder than this. In 2010, I believe Wigginton batted around 240, right? Didn't even have a set position. They would play him at first, they'd play him at third, they'd play him at second, right? I think he finished that year with 24 home runs.
If I'm not mistaken, it was that he had 21 or so at the All-Star break, and I think 24 is indeed what he finished with.
No, that sounds about right.
He was having a good first half. He was appropriately selected. Also, just fell off the cliff.
It was awful, and I actually drove down with some friends. We went down for a little road trip that summer to see a game, and it was one of those games. They were playing the Red Sox, and it was 75% Red Sox fans at Camden Yards. It was so humiliating. And Ty Wigginton got the loudest cheers of any Oriole. It was very sad. And of course they lost that game. So Ty Wigginton represents kind of the sad part of those Orioles years. No, he was not a bad baseball player. He was a pretty solid ball player. And again, this is weird. I didn't plan this out originally. We talked about Melvin Mora having lots of kids. Ty Wigginton, the weird story with him is that his wife gave birth in their home's walk-in closet, and he cut the umbilical cord with a shoelace, was the story there. So, yeah.
Do you happen to have that child's name at hand? Because I do.
No, I please let me know.
Does anyone want to take a guess as to what, I'll just let you know, incredibly white conservative Ty Wigginton's child's name is?
So I figured that it was going to be a white conservative name. I was thinking like Colt, maybe?
Colt is one. Xavier, what was yours?
Braden.
Diaz. Here's what I'll tell you, Diaz, before you answer. Colt is both sound-wise and also general vibe closer than Braden.
Well, so I already went to the Wikipedia, so I'm not going to...
Why don't you know? Then why don't you deliver it?
It is canon.
It is canon and sound like the artillery.
Oh my gosh. So again, this is just a very, very sad kind of footnote in that era of Orioles history. So Ty Wigginton is the sad, and now that brings us to the ugly. And the ugly here is about performance and about legacy in a way. This is probably the biggest gap, like the biggest canyon between a guy that I wanted to be good so badly, right? You know, I feel like every fan has a player on their team that they just almost want to will to be good just because that guy is so cool, and it could not have ended any worse. And this player is Daniel Cabrera. So Daniel Cabrera, this is a little more of an obscure pull here, but Daniel Cabrera was a prospect that the Orioles brought up in the early 2000s. I think he broke in around 04 or so. This guy was about 6'7", 6'8", somewhere in that ballpark. Just a mountain of a man. Terrifying. Like, it's intimidating just looking at his baseball reference picture. Like, I'm scared. Like, I want to say, yes, sir, right? Or, excuse me, sir, just looking at his baseball reference picture, right? Terrifying. Through upper 90s all the time. But he was like Wild Thing from Major League. Could not hit the broadside of a barn. And a typical Daniel Cabrera stat line would be like 5 1/3 innings, 6 walks, 8 strikeouts, right? Like 3 hit by pitch. Just never got it together. And hope sprang eternal every year. So, this is the year. This is the year that Daniel Cabrera becomes like the next Randy Johnson. And it never happened, and it never happened, and it never happened. And his career ended with a wet fart with the O's. And I think he got in a couple games, like with Washington, maybe, right at the very end. And
I've got it pulled up. He was with Washington. He's got a bunch of minor league contracts. Arizona twice, the Angels, the White Sox, the Pirates. He is also a Chunichi Dragons legend. I do have to give him credit. I think he would have come in just after Wei-Yin Chen left to come to the Orioles. So he did not overlap with Wei-Yin Chen on the Chunichi Dragons. But very, very close. Ships in the night.
Wow. Yeah, and so all the minor league contracts, because he's one of those guys where every team was like, we can do it. We can be the one.
It may not have worked for everybody else.
Right.
But it might work for us.
Yes, it might work for us. Exactly. So, again, just to wrap up on Daniel Cabrera, you're looking at career 892 innings pitched with a 1.573 whip and a career 5.10 ERA with 48 wins and 65 losses. So we've got the good, the sad, and the ugly. I know there are probably other more interesting athletes I could have talked about, but I said, no, if I have a platform to talk about dark era Orioles, I'm going to take it. So I appreciate you giving me the platform to talk about these 3 guys.
Before we get into these guys a little more, James, we do need a final count. Did you have a Daniel Cabrera shirt?
I did not have a Daniel Cabrera shirt. I did not have a Daniel Cabrera shirt.
I got to tell one final little pin I got to stick on Daniel Cabrera. Daniel Cabrera will forever be known as the pitcher who started the game that the Orioles lost 30-3 against the Texas Rangers.
Oh my God.
It's pretty bad.
Josh Hamilton went 6 for 6 with 3 home runs that night?
3 home runs, yep. 6 for 6 with 3 home runs. And I had actually driven down to the game the night before that Mark Hendrickson was scheduled to pitch. Ended up getting rained out.
Mark Hendrickson. Yeah. Sorry.
Ended up getting rained out. We turned around and went home. Next day was the 30-3 game. So glad we didn't stick around.
Man, that team sucks. I've been to so many terrible Orioles games. My God, man, this is just kind of really like making me sit with that for a moment. There's a lot to like about these guys. There's a lot to like about all 3 of these guys. You very much understood the exact kind of person we were looking for. I appreciate that. One thing I need to add about Melvin Mora is the reason I thought we were alluding to him being sad. Melvin Mora did as a 7-year-old see his dad murdered in front of him, the story always being because it was a case of mistaken identity and a gang-related murder.
That's right.
So that is why I thought we were saying Melvin Mora was always sad, because that was always in the back of my head watching Melvin Mora. He was also a huge Toby Keith fan. Toby Keith was his walkout music for like a decade.
Wow.
That story does explain the permanently looking like he's about to cry face. I think it's
just froze in that
it's
moment.
understandable.
I did find a article confirming this because the Wikipedia page did not have a source for it. Melvin Mora did pull out of the World Baseball Classic because he was upset that Miguel Cabrera was going to get to start at third base over him.
Which is funny because Miguel Cabrera, or I'm sorry, I thought you said Miguel Tejada for a split second. I got that mixed up. That's the wrong country. Miguel Cabrera is Venezuelan. Whoops. Melvin Mora really thought he was better than... Okay, so I had a very high opinion of Melvin Mora growing up. I thought he had the best arm in baseball at third base. I thought he was an absolute cannon. I would not have put him above Miguel Cabrera. I knew
This is 34-year-old Melvin Mora and 22-year-old Marlins Miguel Cabrera.
And you know what?
And
I'm going to come around on that a little bit. I feel like the veteran gets to maybe pull a little bit of weight if it's 12 years.
So he said specifically that he would have deferred if they were going to start Edgardo Alfonso at third base, since he was also in his 30s. But he thought it was disrespectful to start a 22-year-old at third base and make Melvin Mora go to the outfield. So he just pulled out of the entire tournament.
This is the Venezuelan baseball version, except it went the other way. Like, I relate it to Diana Taurasi getting that last spot on the women's national team. Caitlin Clark is clearly better at this point. But you do have those locker room dynamics of like, okay, this is the veteran. This might be their last chance. When do you turn the page? In that instance, Venezuelans with Miguel Cabrera, I understand it.
Apparently it helped the Orioles out too, because at the same time, they made a formal request to the World Baseball Classic to not take too many O's. Because 11 members of the Orioles, including 10 of the 25-man roster, were selected to go to the World Baseball Classic. So
incredible given the state of that roster.
So they did not have enough players for spring training and asked teams give back their players instead of taking them.
Every national team wants all of these players. Why are they not good when they're a professional team?
Unbelievable.
Diaz, I must give you credit. Ty Wigginton, a Phillies legend. I believe of these three, the only Phillies legend. So I don't know if that sways you in any particular fashion.
Well, it fits with the category because he was a 2012 Philly, which was the beginning of our dark period.
Yeah.
So, Ty Wigginton just brings doom and bad baseball with him everywhere he goes.
And I always remember him as a Met, too. When I was in high school, he was a Met. Yeah, and I had a friend in high school who was a huge Mets fan who loved Ty Wigginton. Just absolutely loved him. So I had high hopes when he came to Baltimore, but what are you going to do?
Yeah, actually, I think I saw him during the 2012. I think that's a Phillies game that I went to in college, in which he was at one point at third base while Juan Samuel, also of the Orioles dark period, as the third base coach, was at that time the Phillies third base coach, and the two of them were like jawing it up at third while Wiggy was there at one point. That was a beautiful beginning of the I-95 alliance, Diaz, that we have strengthened for so many years.
It was beautiful. Juan Samuel, I gotta say, never made a wrong decision as third base coach for the Phillies. Maybe for the O's he did, but with the Phillies, immaculate.
The reason he left is he was installed as the interim when Dave Tremblay was sent out before Buck Showalter, and he just didn't really want to go back down after having been the manager before Buck came in. Sorry, this is getting very in the weeds about 2000s Orioles baseball. This is incredibly appealing to two of us and like 6 listeners.
Yes, and side note, Dave Tremblay actually played and coached and had his whole career here at SUNY Brockport. It's a suburb of Rochester here, so it's another connection.
I know for a fact I have a Dave Tremblay autograph somewhere in this house. This is real sickos hours. And that then brings us to Daniel Cabrera. And the really appealing thing to me about Daniel Cabrera is he represents the bridge between the terrible Orioles and the modern Orioles. He is when all of the Orioles' fates truly change, because he is that beginning of an era pretty much all after Mike Mussina, in which the Baltimore Orioles are physically incapable of developing a durable, long-term starting pitcher. Just cannot do it. Have not been able to do it a single time since Mike Mussina, really, to any extent. I hope that there are people currently in the organization and who have currently played in the Major League roster that have done that, but I think we spoke about this in a relatively recent episode. I'm trying to remember exactly how recent it'll be when this comes out. He is the progenitor of the Jake Arrieta years, the Brian Mattis years, the Matt Hobgoods, the Kevin Gausman never quite living up to it, the Dylan Bundys. He is the beginning of this endless hype cycle for Orioles pitchers that we have to psych ourselves up for every year, despite knowing exactly what we're going to settle for, because you have to get excited before the season starts in order to get through it.
This is true. Although if you had told me that flameout Zach Britton would end up having the single greatest dominant season in Orioles closer and one of the greatest closer seasons in baseball history, I would have taken that. I would have taken that trade.
Absolutely. Many of them became good pitchers. None of them became good, durable starting pitchers for the Baltimore Orioles. It's a very specific thing they're incapable of doing.
No, and there was a whole crop even before that with Matt Riley and BJ Ryan and some of these other guys like that.
Oh God, there was one that was a Quizzo. Scott Rice.
I have no idea who that is.
Scott Rice was taken in 1999, and it was just another nothing. Just another goddamn nothing. Adam Lowen also is on this list.
Converted outfielder. Yeah.
Yeah. From British Columbia. So at least he was Canadian, a little bit exciting. But yeah, man, Orioles just unable to do it again. And that is an appeal of Daniel Cabrera that he holds this archetype. Diaz Xavier, I know that I am speaking from a deep place of expertise, but maybe we need the people who have less personal attachment to this to be able to see without emotion and see which one of them is representing more of the guy characteristics we look for.
Well, so that's where I'm torn, because I do have the very incredibly personal bias of learning that Melvin Mora's maternal last name is Diaz. So to know that he is a fellow Diaz, albeit, once removed, I guess is how we would say that. That was a fun discovery. But if I were to nail down worst all-star of all time, feels like it's somebody that belongs in our hall. And that's kind of the vein I'm getting with Ty Wigginton.
The one thing I feel like I am obligated to mention is that Ty Wigginton did get along pretty well with Aubrey Huff, and I will leave it at that.
It's a morality clause.
All right, question for you guys. Where do you think Ty Wigginton landed on the list of 2010 Orioles by WAR for that season?
I don't think he's in the top 9. I'll say 10. I'll just formally say 10, but I don't think he's in the top 9. I don't think he's in the starting lineup.
I'll give you 7.
7?
Boy, that was a bad team. I'll say 8.
Diaz, you got it right on the money. Ty Wigginton was 7th. He had 1.1 WAR, which was 0.1 behind Brian Roberts, and 0.2 ahead of Felix P.A.
Happy Foot? Good old Happy Foot? Chicago Cubs legend Felix P.A. Number 18.
He was on my short list. PA was on my short
Felix
list.
P.A. fucking hit for the cycle. Felix P.A. hit for the goddamn cycle.
Luke Scott was number 1 on the team that year with a 3.8 WAR.
I think that's the year that I almost got to catch Luke Scott Grand Slam. In Matt Wieder's debut game, if I'm not mistaken, when he was still wearing number 15. Because a teacher of mine threw out the first pitch, and I went down to the flag court to watch him throw out the first pitch. Hey, cool, that's my biology teacher. He's good. He had just won Teacher of the Year in the city or something like that. And then I went up to join the rest of the people I was sitting with in upper reserve. And Luke Scott against the Tigers, this is one of those times where he's going off on an absolute heater. Yeah, halfway through the game, they're trailing the Tigers, and Luke Scott smacks a beauty of a grand slam to flag court. And the person that catches it is the person I'd given my spot to on the railing when I ran up. So I didn't actually come that close to catching it, but in my mind, in my heart, I was an inch away from that Luke Scott grand slam. Sorry, Luke Scott, also pretty tight with Aubrey Huff and Ty Wigginton.
Yeah, I was just about to say, Luke Scott's one of those guys I liked a lot more when I knew a lot less about him, because he had one of the most gorgeous left-handed power swings, just power stroke. And there was nothing in those late innings he'd come up and just put a charge into one, and I loved it. And he played really hard, and he was real hardworking. And you start learning about him, I'm like, I don't really want to root for you anymore.
Not great. It's not great.
No, not great.
I'm actually remembering, this is why I'm trying to start eliminating ones here. I think I am going to eliminate Ty Wigginton. Because here's the thing about...
Luke Scott says Barack Obama wasn't born in America.
Yeah, man, Luke Scott's not... Again, I said what I said about who he hung out with, and we can leave it at that. Ty Wigginton with his one All-Star appearance. Yeah, it was always kind of crazy, particularly through the mid-2010s as the Orioles started to have more All-Stars. There was a point where we had 8 of 9 of our players having been All-Stars at some point, with the only exception being arguably the second or third best player to this entire run, which is Nick Markakis. Nick Markakis eventually made an All-Star game as a member of the Atlanta baseball team, but never appeared in the All-Star game as an Oriole. And really that year where Wigginton got it is probably the year that Nick Markakis should have made the All-Star game as an Oriole. And it is frustrating that, I love that he had as much of a second career with Atlanta as he did, but the fact that Atlanta got to cheer on Nick Markakis in the All-Star game and Baltimore didn't, and it is somewhat the fault of Ty Wigginton. I think if we're just looking for reasons to start crossing people off, that feels like one for Ty Wigginton. Again, getting incredibly into the weeds for the reasoning.
No, I accept that. So then we're back down to the
Melvin
shining
Mora,
star of the early
Daniel
2000s Orioles, or the potential, the burnout, the what could have been. And honestly, I truly do defer to you, James, as the resident Orioles expert. I do feel like this is your vote.
Here's just one other thing that I love about Melvin Mora, now realizing that he's second through till 2011. Did not realize that he made it to 2011. He was in N64 baseball games. There are 64-bit polygonal versions of Melvin Mora that I have played. And then, he probably existed in the show also. And that's wild. That's an insane bridge of time to cross. I've been trying to step back a little bit, but the admission that I have to make is, Diaz, years ago when you and I very first started talking about what would a sports podcast betwixt the two of us look like, and we talked about trying to find peripheral guys, I could probably find that document from way back, and I know for a fact that the first name on that bulleted list is Melvin Mora's name. I've never come up with Melvin Mora. I've never had a good reason to do it. But when I was trying to figure out what is a guy, what is the kind of person we're going to talk about, Melvin Mora is a benchmark that I have turned to. He has been a North Star. Honestly, there's a lot of kismet in being able to bring Melvin Mora in this way without me having to select him. This feels like a completion of a lot of this project, honestly. If you're going to defer to me, I think I'm going to lean towards Melvin Mora.
I mean, I think that is where I'd lean to. Xavier, do you want to? Is this going to be a split vote or is it unanimous?
This is going to be unanimous. I've got nothing against
Melmo,
Melvin Mora.
by the way, Melmo, an actual thing that we would say in the stadium frequently. We were stupid.
I love that. Well, listen, a hallmark of this podcast is that there are no truly bad teams. There are teams that do poorly, but they are still made up of guys, and they are guys that can do well and can rise above from the muck. And when we look about the aughts of the Orioles, the awful aughts of the Orioles, there are but a few brief shining moments, and one of them does share a maternal last name with my paternal last name, which is pretty cool, but that's not the reason why he's going in. He consistently gave you a good glove, and he consistently gave you a good bat. You can't do anything about the other 8 spots in the lineup, the other 8 spots in the field, but you had no doubt that when Melvin Mora took the field, he was going to show up, he was going to deliver, and you have no doubt that Melvin Mora is a guy. He is inducted. Welcome to the Hall of Guy, Melvin Mora Diaz. And I'm going to request that Mora Diaz be on the plaque.
I'll put that on the plaque. I couldn't be happier to welcome Melvin Mora in here. And it has been a joy for us to get to welcome you onto this show, John. If this is perhaps piqued someone's appetite, if they're hungry for more of these strange esoteric foods of the past, where can they find some of your delightful research?
So they can find my posts on Twitter at snack_memories, and it's Discontinued Foods. And, I have to say, though, I've been spending a lot more time on Blue Sky over the last several months.
Make the switch. Just leave it.
Yeah.
Leave it forever. Leave it behind.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I'll tell you. If I was able to do scheduled posts on Blue Sky, that's the only place I would post. I post on Twitter mostly because I can schedule out 2 weeks worth of posts in advance. But if you want to find me on Blue Sky, I hang out there a lot. I do a lot of little Q&A, a lot of discussions. I love interacting with people. You can find me there at Discontinued Foods.
And folks, if there is anything you're looking for from Remember That Guy, you can always find it bit.ly/Remember That Guy, all one word, all lowercase. Before we move on, we want to thank our producer Craig and the coders behind him and our musical director Don Ham for that lovely theme music. And we want to thank you, dear listener, for joining us again. We've got at least one more episode before we dive into our planned Joe Flacco miniseries Elite. We hope you will join us for all of those. But that is all that I have this week. Anything else from you guys before we head out?
The Eagles made a lot of money selling snow.
The Eagles did make a lot of money selling snow. That carries no curse connotations with it whatsoever.
I hope that they've also made a lot of money selling Super Bowl champion memorabilia by the time this episode comes out.
I guess we'll see. We have now placed a sound effect marker that James will have to come back to later, but that's producer James. Right now, I've just been one of your hosts, James.
I've been the very special guest Xavier.
I am the keeper of snack memories, John Finn at Discontinued Foods. Go Bills.
Go Bills, go Birds. I'm not sure if I'm going to be saying go Bills in 2 weeks from this, 2 weeks ago as we listen to this. The time dynamics get a little confusing. One thing I'm sure of is that I've been one of your co-hosts, Diaz, and my personal favorite discontinued food is, remember that lemon meringue guy pie.
Got it.